Germany's new defense minister has little military or ministerial experience and takes up the job at a historic crunch point. Boris Pistorius has already overseen the decision which has seen Germany relent and agree to send main battle tanks to Ukraine. But can he survive in such a toxic job in the long term? Welcome to the program. I'm Philip Hampshire. One former German defense minister described the job as an ejector seat, a sack of landmines, and a snake pit. That was 35 years ago, but in many ways little has changed. Pistorius replaced Christine Lambrecht, who has resigned last week after a series of controversies. Now he walks into a pressure cooker of a position as Germany wrestles with its reticence to fight wars after the carnage of the 20th century and pressure from NATO allies to do more to help Ukraine fight Russia right now. So sending Leopard 2 tanks may just be the start. He also has to get the wholesale reconstruction of Germany's military underway. Joining us on the show today from St Andrews in Scotland, we have Alim Baluch, who is a lecturer in German politics and society at the University of Bath. From London, there's Domitilla Sagramoso, who's a Russian expert, senior lecturer at the Department of War Studies at King's College London. And from Riga, we have Glen Grant, who's a military expert at the Baltic Security Foundation. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today. So, Alim, I'm going to start off with you, if I may. Just why is the German defense minister's position quite so toxic as it seems to be? Nobody seems to be able to hold on to this job without getting a large amount of flack from newspapers, the media, the press, from other politicians as well. There's a lot of stress attached to this post.
I think it's very toxic at this moment due to the war in Ukraine, where we see very strong condemnation of Germany, very harsh criticism coming from countries such as Poland, from Baltic countries, from sources within Washington, D.C. And then the German media will report about this. So there's a lot of pressure on the defense minister, who is the commander-in-chief in Germany. It's not the chancellor, it's the defense minister. Unless Germany is attacked, then the chancellor will be the commander-in-chief. So very high expectations, harsh criticisms, and they are not always realistic given Germany's commitments and legal traditions. And you have the 2+4 treaty. It's not easy for Germany to deviate from certain legal commitments and just supply weapons to a war zone. It cannot be done very quickly, and it should be done with care.
Well, we'll get on to the sending of weapons in just a moment. Glenn, let me ask you, how difficult do you think the German defense minister's job is?
Well, I think it's difficult, but it's been made more difficult by the Chancellor in the way that the Chancellor has been absolutely stubborn about weapons, and therefore he's put his defense minister in almost in between a rock and a hard place. But we've heard that there might be changes, so let's hope that actually the defense minister is getting his head round this and is going to follow the path that just about everybody in Europe wants him to follow.
Domitilla, how difficult is the defense minister's job in Germany, given that the current chancellor, Olaf Shaws, he's not historically been a massive fan of NATO? That's going to place an additional pressure on the defense minister, isn't it?
Yes, I think that more than anything, there is a tradition within the SPD, the party of the chancellor, of trying to build bridges with Russia, of sort of what we call sort of a pacifist current, which is not eager to send weaponry to countries where there is a conflict, which feels that is concerned about a repetition of the events of the Second World War and the Second World War period, so the Cold War period when Germany was divided and occupied by the Soviet Union. So I think there is a very strong current within certain sectors of the SPD and sectors of the German public which is very reluctant to the idea that Germany becomes involved again in a war in Europe. And I think, Chancellor Scholz is part a bit of his tradition. I mean, in his youth, he was certainly very, very sort of critical of NATO. But I think his positions have evolved and he's become sort of more of a center person. But still, he sort of tries to emulate the policies of his predecessors, and he makes references to also, we can make references to sort of the famous Ostpolitik of trying to build bridges with the East. Although it is, it should be highlighted that, Willy Brandt, who initiated the famous Ostpolitik, was also very keen on setting up very close ties with the United States. And he famously sort of gave birth to the whole notion of the Marshall Plan Center. So, I think we need to be a bit careful, but it certainly shows in his hesitation, his reluctance to accept, that other countries and that Germany send Leopard tanks. But the news seems to be that Germany is ready to send at least 14 tanks, and also allow other countries such as Poland, Finland, and others who are interested in sending these tanks, also because apparently the United States is ready to also send 30 Abrams tanks, which was one of the conditions that were put by the Chancellor, this idea that Germany was not going to go it alone, so to say.
Alim, why do you think Scholz was so reticent, reluctant? Why did he find it so difficult to send tanks to Ukraine, even as there was so much pressure from countries around him, all of whom said, well, come on now, we want to send our tanks and we need your permission before we can do that?
Olaf Scholz never said that he's completely opposed to sending tanks to Ukraine. Germany has supported Ukraine, but yes, compared to other countries, compared to the United Kingdom, which delivered tanks already, I think, or they're much faster in setting up deliveries, it may appear more hesitant. But I mean, we have to remember we have the 2+4 agreement, which states only peace may ever emanate from German soil, unless, of course, Germany is attacked or a NATO partner is attacked. So Germany is entrenched in several codified treaties and declarations, and Germany presents itself as this power an economic power that does not promote a national defense policy, but only supports a communal defense policy, whether it's a European defense policy or whether it's a NATO policy output, or it has to be a communal defense policy. That's very important to Germany, and that's why Germany stressed under Olaf Scholz, we don't want to be exposed as we don't want to expose our own national defense policy. We want the US to send tanks as well, and then we're happy to chip in as well. Also, France is hesitant. Why is Germany under so much scrutiny when other countries are hesitant as well? Greece doesn't want to send tanks to Ukraine. So why this criticism of Germany when we never said we wouldn't do it, right? So this seems to be artificial to many in Germany. And we have 3 million ethnic Russians in Germany. Germany is concerned about the Russian minority in Germany. They consume Russian media. This is a minority that can be alienated, that can be problematic. If you stand in Berlin and you give a speech in the Bundestag, you realize you're not that far from the war zone. Also, you have the history of World War II, Operation Barbarossa, all the crimes committed against Soviet civilians. So all this plays into German hesitancy.
Glen, if we were to look at the history of the defense minister's post, they've had 9 separate defense ministers in Germany in the course of 25 years, which is a reasonably high turnover for quite a prominent position in the German government. A lot of German politicians have said that this is an incredibly difficult job to do, and it's not a very well appreciated job. What is it about the post that makes it so hard?
It's not so much about the post as about the environment. Quite simply, the German defense forces are too large for the budget, actually by a long way. And over the years, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, that budget has been decreasing year on year on year. But the defence forces effectively have stayed much the same. In fact, of course, costs have gone up. They have to pay people more. Just the general day-to-day things with inflation go up. And that means that the forces, even 15, 20 years ago, were stretched. And now, in a lot of cases, the forces are actually broken. So the poor defence minister gets the rough end of this from all the military and from allies who know full well that Germany can't actually do much of which it's supposed to do, given its size and significance in NATO. So the poor minister gets, a rough time from everybody.
So when you say that the defence forces are too large relative to the size of the budget, I suspect I know the answer here, but is the problem that the defence forces are too high, or is the problem that the budget is too small? We have heard, the reason I say I suspect I know the answer here is because we've had several years now the United States pointing at Germany and saying, look, you've got to spend 2% of your budget, 2% of your GDP on defence. That's a treaty commitment.
I think you can pretty much say that the problem is the budget. The major problem is the budget. But the defence forces, even if they went to 2% GDP, I would still say that at the moment the defence forces are too large because they've got years and years of catching up to do for all the things that they've not been paying for properly, like maintenance and training and general running costs. So I think that even now, even if they put a massive upload on the budget, they're still going to have to look hard at all the things like ships and aircraft. Of just, can they still really actually afford to maintain and keep those which they've got?
Domitilla, the UK is sending Challenger 2 tanks to only around a dozen of them, but it's still sending Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine. The US is sending its Abrams tanks. Of course, Ukraine has historic Russian tanks that it's using as well. So the Leopard tank was the odd one out in terms of the fact that up until this point, nobody had made a commitment to send them. Is there a concern here among the German government that, well, maybe we have to send the Leopard 2 tank now because, if you like, without wanting to be tasteless, all the tanks are going to be in one place. This is where you show off what your product does at the end of the day, isn't it?
Well, it's a very complex situation Germany found itself in because many European countries, as was pointed out, had acquired, Leopard tanks, NATO members. And for these countries to send the tanks to Ukraine, they need, of course, German approval because of the sort of the end certificate mechanism, which forces countries, if they want to resell or resend the product they have acquired, they require the approval of the initial producer or the seller. So Germany had to, in a way, had in its hands, the decision whether countries such as Poland or Finland would be able to send tanks to Ukraine. So that, put Germany in a very sort of a strong position in many ways, and that explains also why there were so many pressures. But what is important to highlight is that, within the coalition, within the current government coalition, parties such as the Greens and the FDP, the Liberals, they were very supportive of Germany sort of participating and sending, or at least allowing other countries to send tanks, and if possible also send their own tanks, so Germany sending their own tanks. The fact that there is so much emphasis on the Leopard tanks is that there is a very high number of them within Europe, and it's close to the theater of war, and in some way, operating a similar, a similar model of the same tank, would probably make it easier also in terms of ammunition supplies, much more than, for example, sending tanks from the United States, which is going to happen as well. But all these tanks require proper support, training, a very effective logistic system of logistical support. So it is a really complex undertaking. And I think that in a way, Germany, by being so reluctant, on the one hand, to a certain extent, undermine the possibility of a European defense initiative of military support by demanding so much that the United States also participates. It sort of undermined, the chance that, Europeans had to show that they could take the initiative and defend, their sort of neighbor, in Europe. So I think that is very unfortunate. At the same time, it might, send risks for the German defense industry, because countries are going to wonder if they want to acquire, German weaponry, which might be very good, very efficient, and cost effective. But at the same time, if they need to send it to their neighbors, they will always face this German reluctance. So I think in a way, this whole process may eventually damage German defense industry because many countries are going to wonder if it's not more effective, for example, to buy American tanks or French tanks. So I think that this has been a very unfortunate process. And I think that Chancellor Scholz has really not shown effective leadership and effective determination. He could have clearly stated that he was ready to approve this, and he was very eager, but he needed a coalition. He could have expressed himself a lot more clearly. I think his communication was unfortunately very poor in this whole respect.
Alim, let me ask you, do you agree with that or not?
I wouldn't agree with the portrayal of Olaf Scholz, as previously said, as this, previous hardcore left-wing pacifist. What I would say is that there is a set of more right-wing SPD politicians who have strong ties to Russia. And that has complicated things from a Euro-Atlantic point of view. We have Otto Schily strongly criticizing rushing to Ukraine's help. He's a SPD right-winger, but he has strong ties to Russia, or he's closely aligned with Russian pro-Russian talking points. Gerhard Schröder, who famously opposed the war of aggression against Iraq, it was good that he did it, but did he do it for the right reasons? Now we know he was in Putin's pocket and still is. But he established Germany as a more independent actor on the geopolitical stage, and said decisions that affect Germany's geopolitical interests should be taken in Germany, right? And the quiet part was, and not in Washington, D.C. And Olaf Scholz seems to be picking up the ball and says, okay, we are not being pushed around by Warsaw or by Washington, D.C. It will take time for us to come to our own decision making, and that takes longer, and there's no apology for it. And we will not be easily swayed by accusations of appeasement or Putin-Hitler comparisons.
Glen,
maybe that's a good thing.
Absolutely. Glen, if I can cross to you, does Germany run a risk here? Because there are so many leopard shoes, it is arguably probably the most widely sold tank in the developed world among the developed nations. Is Germany going to have a problem that if Poland sends tanks, if some of the other East European countries send their tanks, they're going to be of a particular variant of the Leopard tank, which is going to be the A4 or the 4A tank. And that is, roughly speaking, at the same level as the Russian tanks' capabilities that are currently in Ukraine. Note, when Germany said, we're going to send our tanks, they're sending Leopard 2-6s, which is an upgraded version, which, of course, will outclass some of the other tanks in the field. At the end of the day, selling tanks is a business for Germany, and if they send the wrong tanks and they perform poorly, will that not reflect badly on the tanks themselves?
That's a very good question, but I don't think, personally, I wouldn't worry about the technical capabilities of the tanks, because the main thing is that the crews, the quality of the crew and how they use it, and then after that, the actual sort of quality of the command and control and how they're actually deployed and used in the battlefield. Because if they're used badly, then they'll get beaten anyway, no matter how good they are. If they're used well, even a bad tank used well and deployed well can actually be quite effective. So I think that quite a bit of this depends upon not so much the tank itself, but how Germany actually trains people to use their tanks and how they make sure that others are trained properly to use the tanks that they get from Finland, Poland, and wherever. Crews are everything.
Domitilla, in your opinion, once these tanks have gone, what does this mean for the historic plan that Europe has had for a common defence initiative for the European Union?
Well, I think if it works, I mean, if this sort of coalition of countries agree to send the Leopard tanks and there is proper coordination and proper, sort of joint training and joint support, as was just mentioned, that there is an effective mechanism that can provide with support, in terms of repair, maintenance, and logistic support, and also training, then I think that could show eventually that Europe has a capability, to develop its own sort of European defense system. But I think that the experiences of the last week or so, have shown, that, Europe is very far away from being able to address issues of European security on its own. Not only has Ukraine relied massively on American support and logistics and armaments, ammunition, equipment, but also, the insistence by Chancellor Scholz that the Leopards would be sort of freed only if America would send Abrams tanks, again, clearly indicates that, Germany wants a European sort of presence and a European umbrella of support in case, the fight extends and Germany feels under threat. So in my view, this is the whole mechanism, and the war in Ukraine has shown how much Europe still relies on the United States and how far away we are, how much more we need to invest in defense, the difficult choices that will have to be made, especially at a time when we are coming out of severe crises around COVID, around energy. Many budgets are very strained in European countries. So I think we're going to face very tough choices, and I'm not sure that European governments are going to be able to sell to their own publics the notion that defense spending must increase, because there are perceptions among many members of the European public which do not see this war as directly threatening their own soil. I mean, there are divided opinions, although maybe the majority are very sympathetic with the Ukrainian cause. There are challenges when that implies that you have to spend more on defense, less on other issues of, social issues which are of concern to the population. So I think we are at a very delicate moment, and, there is a possibility for Europe to sort of raise up to the moment, but it is clear still that, the American presence, the American umbrella of support is decisive. And we're all looking at how, the American Congress is going to behave in terms of providing additional support to Ukraine in the coming months.
Alan, if we can take that and sort of develop it on, what's your opinion of what all of this means for any kind of European defense initiative? Will Europe always be looking to the United States to back it up, as it were, to provide an umbrella?
It's a very complex picture, because you have countries like Denmark, who they were always skeptical of a European defense policy and said, well, we have NATO, we are a NATO member, why do we need a defense policy? We want to opt out of all the EU treaties that mention a European defense policy, and say that Denmark is not actively supporting it. And other countries are more supportive of a European defense policy. So there are questions of, is it duplicating structures that are not necessary, that are superfluous or not? So it's very difficult to see how the Ukraine war will play into this. But Germany was always very closely aligned to US foreign and defense policy. Even Neue Ostpolitik, when Willy Brandt strengthened the ties to Russia and relaxed ties to Moscow. It was shortly after Nixon, the right-wing Republican president, visited China and Moscow. So, so far, the US has a very strong influence in Berlin, and Russia, on the other hand, has lost all its assets or friends, one could say. Gerhard Schröder cannot show his face anymore in the German media. His former wife, Doris Schröder-Kopf, she was very strongly involved in promoting Russian interests, a more Russian-friendly perception management in Germany with the German-Russian Forum. She was Pistorius's girlfriend until last year, shortly after the invasion. So I don't want to read too much into why they separated, but it's obvious that the US and the transatlantic community is winning the propaganda war. That's quite clear.
Well, Alim, Glen, Domitilla, thank you very much, all of you, for joining me today. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just head over to YouTube and search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me here and all of the team, thank you for watching and goodbye.